Hello and welcome to Cryptid by Region, England. Today we are rounding out our completely unplanned leg of this journey, where we took some time to investigate all the cryptids found in the United Kingdom. As you know, I normally like to bounce around the map for this series, but after covering Ireland and Scotland, I thought it best just to continue with the UK. Now, before starting, I have to note that longtime viewer Brother Malachi suggested I look into Cornwall or Kernow before closing this chapter. I had every intent on doing this, but from what I have gathered, it isn't considered its own area, but rather a county of England. With this, I found that England actually has 48 counties that seem to operate very similarly to the states in the US. This includes each area having its own unique flag as well. The only difference that I could find is that Cornwall is considered an administrative or ceremonial county. With all this in mind, for the sake of this video, I'm going to be focusing on England as a whole, even though I know this basically is the same as looking at the cryptids of the US without factoring in the different states. For this, I apologize in advance. So join me in our worldwide cryptid family tour as we travel from our previous location of Wales and venture into England. It is at this point of the video where I like to discuss the history of each location, and I will do that here, but due to England having such a long history, I'm going to have to give a very brief version. Evidence points to people inhabiting the area as far back as 800,000 years ago, with most of them being hunter-gatherers. Many years later, in 55 and 54 BC, Julius Caesar waged war in the land, and even though he won many battles, he never really made settlements at that time. In 43 AD, Roman Emperor Claudius and leader Aulus Plautius ventured back into the area and took a foothold in what we know as Britain. This control would last for the next 350 years. Then in 577, the Germanic people known as the Anglo-Saxons settled in the land and started their rule. In the following years, the greatest threat to their control were the Danish Vikings. These battles would last from 782 until 1042, where by the end of it, a Viking named Canute the Great eventually sat on the throne as the King of England, followed by his sons. Following this, the Anglo-Saxons would regain the throne, but this wouldn't last long when the people who were ancestors of Norse Vikings from Normandy would invade, and they would be known as Normans. The throne would change hands many times through the years, and include many we are familiar with, such as Henry VIII, Elizabeth I, and King Charles I. In 1707, Parliament passed an act that would unify England and Scotland into the Kingdom of Great Britain. Then, on January 1, 1801, Parliament brought Ireland into the fold and created the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland. Now, when it comes to the flag of England, I realized that I was greatly mistaken in my perception of what it looked like. If you are like me and immediately thought it was this, then you would share in my error, since this is the United Kingdom flag. This is the flag of England, and is based on the St. George's Cross. St. George was a Roman soldier who later became the patron saint of England, and there are tales of him even slaying a dragon in Cyrene, Libya. The white background is said to represent a story about St. George and two other saints helping Godfrey of Bouillon and Richard the Lionhearted at the siege of Antioch, where he along with his troops rode in on pure white horses and carried white banners. The Red Cross is harder to pin down, but most attribute it to the Crusades, and it being red was a way to differentiate the soldiers from England and France. Okay, let's talk about cryptids. England is home to quite a few cryptids, so let's not waste any time and get right into them. As suggested, I feel my first stop in this realm needs to be cryptids of the flying variety. Starting off, we have a real oddity from the county of Cumbria and the town of Renwick. The date is rather hard to pin down, but most agree the event occurred around 1610. Apparently, the townsfolk had started the process of tearing down their old church, when suddenly a large flying beast emerged from the ruins and started to attack the workers. Descriptions vary, with some saying it was the strange creature known as the cockatrice, where it had leathery wings and a scaly body, whereas others state it was simply an enormous bat, one that was much larger than any that were native to the area. All of them assumed that this beast was actually protecting its home from destruction. Apparently, all managed to flee the site except the clerk named John Tallentire. According to the story, this man valiantly stood his ground and fought back with a branch from a rowan tree. John would become victorious in his battle, and in recognition of this feat, he and his lineage were considered exempt from paying any tithes to the church for life. It is said that there are still sightings of this creature flying in the sky at night. Moving on to another church involving a strange flying cryptid is the Owl Man, which is said to reside in the Monmouth Smith area of Cornwall. While it has been seen in various places, it tends to be sighted around the St. Monin and St. Stephen's Church. This creature is described as standing 5 to 6 feet tall, has long black claws on its feet, is covered in gray and brown feathers, has a wingspan of 10 feet, red glowing eyes, and makes a loud hissing noise. Most descriptions paint it as a cross between a man and an owl. The first sighting occurred on April 17, 1976, when two girls named Vicky and June Melling were staying in the area for vacation with their parents. On that night, the girls approached the spooky church, and to their shock, they saw this creature standing on the top of the bell tower. The girls ran home, and their parents took them to the police to report the sighting. Once there, they were taken into separate rooms and asked to draw what they saw. The girls' drawings matched rather closely, and this was enough for their parents to realize that they needed to cut their vacation short. On July 3rd of that same year, a girl named Sally Chapman was camping with her friend, Barbara Perry, near the church. When night fell, Sally heard a hissing noise coming from the trees, and when she looked up, she saw a man-sized owl with glowing red eyes and silvery feathers standing on a tree branch. At first she thought it was a local playing a prank on them dressed in a costume. Then as she watched, the creature took to the air and revealed its long talons on its feet. This same being would then be reported in various forms the following years. While many feel that these reports may have been a hoax, that hasn't stopped sightings, and an odd revelation from being revealed. In 1989, a man named Gavin reported that he was with his girlfriend in the area investigating the claims. This is when they found the creature standing on the roof of the church, and it was around 5 feet tall, had high ankles, its legs were black, its feet only had 2 toes, the feathers were a grayish-brown color, and its eyes glowed, even without light being present. Then in 1995, a tourist from Chicago claimed that she saw the creature as well on her visit, and described it as a man bird. In 2019, a paranormal investigator named Chris Power claimed that while investigating the church, he heard a hissing noise above him. When he looked up, he saw the same creature that everyone else had described flying over him, and he stated that it had 2 pronounced horns coming from its head. In one report I read, investigators visited the town and found that many locals saw this creature as well, but the story wasn't really talked about since many of the original people had moved on since the first sighting. Questions always arise with this story as to its credibility, but it has a lot of sightings from all different types of people. I find it interesting that it is so often linked to Mothman. Let's move on to some terrestrial type of cryptids. While I normally include stories about dogmen in the honorable mentions section, I found a fascinating story from Kenneck Chase in Staffordshire. According to the reports, this creature has been seen all over the area, but it seems to frequent the German War Cemetery. Sightings have been reported for quite some time, but in 2007, there were a lot of them. Over 40 to be more exact. The first came from a postman that was simply going about his rounds. As he neared the cemetery, he saw what he thought was a giant dog standing by the side of the road. Once he got nearer, the creature stood up on its back legs and ran into the adjacent forest with great speed. In April, a scout leader who wished to remain anonymous claimed he was walking through the forest when he saw a large dog stalking around the bushes. He kept his eyes on the beast as he made his way to his car. As soon as he opened his door, this dog suddenly stood up on his back legs and ran away. He claimed it was around 6 to 7 feet tall, had shaggy black hair, and a long muzzle. In 2006, there were reports of a similar creature being seen running across the road. Apparently, there have been sightings from police, forest rangers, military personnel, as well as various civilians. The sad thing is that many of these claims are not officially written down, since people fear that others will think that they're crazy. It should be noted that in this area, there have been large numbers of people's dogs going missing, and the mutilated carcasses of deer being found. Some have even gone as far as claiming that these unknown beasts might actually live in underground caverns. Going from one hairy creature to another, we find the one known as the Beast of Dean. It was first seen in the Forest of Dean in Gloucestershire in 1802. Descriptions are scarce, but it appeared to be a boar that was said to be almost as large as a moose. It was strong enough to knock over trees and break fences. The oddest characteristic is that it is said to be capable of producing an extremely loud roar. After many sightings, people managed to kill the beast in 1807, but they said it was unlike anything they had ever seen. Or should I say they thought they killed it, since the roaring sound could still be heard in the woods. Then, in 1998, two men named James Nash and Marshall Davies were wandering through the area when they suddenly noticed that the forest had become eerily silent. It was at this point that they heard a low growl that continued to grow louder in intensity the longer they stayed there. Finally, they saw two giant black masses lumbering toward them from the dark woods, and they decided it was time to move on. They ran until they found a well-lit road, and when they stopped, they heard an unearthly loud growl resonating from behind them. The report ends there, so we don't know what happened next, but since we have this story, it must mean that they survived. I will finish up this main list with two very similar entries, which would be crocodiles. One has been seen multiple times in Bristol swimming in the River Avon. It was first seen by a bus driver named Jolion Rea, and then in 2014 a jogger named Tamara Blanco took a picture of the same creature as she was out exercising. The police investigated, but weren't able to find anything odd in the water. Then a woman named Kelly Gray and even the local town councilor named Tom Aditya claimed to have seen the large reptile as well. Following this, a man from North Somerset claimed that he saw the crocodile in the river, and he thought it was eyeing him hungrily as the man walked by. Now, with this story, I did find reports that at an unknown date, the crocodiles of the World Zoo did later capture a 2-foot-long spectacled caiman from the Bristol Reservoir. They claim that at full grown, it could reach a length of 6 feet. Was this the culprit behind the sightings, or is there another one in the water? In 2003, there were reports of another crocodile in the Connect area known as Roman View Pool. Some may be confused by this name, but in this sense, the word pool is basically what we would call a pond. A man named John Mizzen reported seeing a 7-foot-long crocodile that was 18 inches wide and was a blackish-greenish color swimming in the water for at least 3 to 4 seconds. Others claim that a local slaughterhouse near the area that frequently handled ill horses for use in feeding zoo animals found a few of the carcasses that they had hung out had large bites taken out of them. On July 21, 2003, John Downs and Mark Martin traveled to the water to investigate recent sightings of the crocodile. After many hours of investigation, they did see an 18-inch long blackish-green head appear above the water for a moment. They also found an area in the reeds that had been flattened down as if a large crocodile had emerged from the water in that spot. As usual, I couldn't talk in depth about all cryptids this country has, so here we are at the honorable mentions section. While it shouldn't be a shock, especially with all the other locations we have covered, England does have a few Bigfoot sightings. Some simply call them giants, while the ones in Connect, Staffordshire are said to be similar to trolls. Another one along this line would be the strange Fiskerton Phantom, which is reportedly part big cat and part Bigfoot. I made a video about this very being a while ago and will include a link to it in the description below. It should come as no surprise that alien big cats are quite prominent here as well. There are various tales of these, including the Beast of Exmoor, Beast of Bodmin Moor, and you guessed it, the Beast of Dartmoor. The previously named one was recently discovered to be 3 pumas that had been released by a woman named Mary Chipperfield. She ran a zoo in Plymouth and released the cats before the business was closed down. We can't have big cat stories without mentioning the various reports of phantom black dogs. Of course, the most famous is Black Shuck. Apparently, this hellhound attacked a church and even left scorch marks on the door, which are still visible to this day. You may be interested to know that apparently Lake Windermere has a type of lake monster similar to Nessie. This one is called Bowness or Winnie, and from what I can tell, it was first reported around 2006. I will mention the sea serpent known as Morgwar from Cornwall for posterity, although after looking at the pictures, I think it may be whales mating. Interestingly, I saw varying reports of a type of chupacabra creature being seen, but I couldn't quite pinpoint where it exactly was. While not technically a cryptid, I did see stories about a reanimated pile of bones that would attack people, and it was simply known as Bloody Bones. I also wanted to include the Canvey Island monster, and while I have seen many stylized drawings of this creature, I think the skeptics are correct, in that if you looked at the original photo, it does look very similar to a monkfish. I include this since I feel the people were not perpetuating a hoax, but were unaware at the time of this fish existing in the water. The only blame that can be placed on this creature still being included on cryptid lists are those who still do it today. As I end this video, I hope that I did England and its various counties justice, and that I didn't butcher the history too bad. Being I know that I have many viewers from the UK, I'd be interested in hearing if you have had any encounters with creatures that I didn't mention. I also want to note that while I normally don't do this since I get so many votes for states, the viewer named AFox Gamer requested that I look into the cryptids of Louisiana way before the Cryptid by State series was even a thought. So, sorry for missing this in my notes from last week. Speaking of which, remember to keep voting for which state you would like to see next in that series. Last week, you all impressed me with voting for various states 72 times. Things are really starting to heat up on the list, and even after 51 votes going to Georgia and Delaware, we still have a neck-and-neck battle. If you haven't yet done so, do please consider subscribing to my channel for more content like this. Also, it would be greatly appreciated if you would share my videos with someone you know who may enjoy this type of genre. With that, be safe, and I'll see you in the next one. Later.